The dead body lay in a bloody puddle, and the rain poured down, turning the ground into mud. A warrior in a tattered cloak was on his knees, bowing his head to his sword. Among him were killed enemies. He had survived a major battle. There were bloody marks on his face. There were holes all over his clothes. His sword ached with scratches and traces of blood. The guy was surrounded by dead people. Some of them were stuck with a sword, and some of them were missing part of their body. The warriors killed in battle lay motionless in the rigor of death, their bloody bodies washed by the rain. The young man raised his head from the sword and looked around. An endless horizon of space opened up before him, all covered with the corpses of warriors. The young man was shocked by the realization that he was the only one who survived among the many dead. Suddenly the warrior heard a voice behind him, causing the young man to turn around sharply with shocked surprise on his face. Someone's voice said that he couldn't think that there was such a strong person. The guy recognized him as his enemy, who turned out to be alive. The young man jumped onto the lying body of an enemy warrior, who was tens of times taller and larger than the guy, and behind the unknown man's back there were several pairs of wings. The body of this creature was marble, white, like plaster, but everything was cut with a knife, and there were horns on the head. This monster was called the Great Arnold. 20 days ago he revealed himself to the Empire and, together with his comrades, began to wreak havoc for no reason. And he was the last of the 3 giants, because of which half of the Empire turned into a cemetery, and the warrior wondered why this giant was still alive. But Arnold spoke up and assured the young man not to worry, that he would not be alive for long, he would soon return to his world, and the guy noticed that his dead friends were already waiting there. The giant was surprised by the guy's words about friends. The young man clarified that Arnold's friends were the 2 who came with him. The young man added that one of the giants was fried by our hot-tempered red dragon. He also added that another giant was imprisoned forever by an old man named Leon. The young man smiled evilly from the realization that both giants got what they deserved. Arnold told the guy not to hide the truth behind false words, and added that the star's children are related to each other. The giants said that they knew that their opponents were also destroyed along with him, and at the end he added that there were no more brave men like this guy left. But the hero tried to remain calm. He did not understand what the giant's words meant, because he hoped that he had already died. But Arnold told him not to get ahead of himself, because his end was near. The giant explained that if the young man had realized his abilities earlier and began to develop them, he would have become a big obstacle in their path. The young man was offended by this. He explained to the creature that he already knew that his life was bad, and he told the giant to shut up and die. The young man stepped on the monster's eye, and he said that the young man was a righteous man and could be proud of it. Arnold added that eventually the guy's world would disappear, swallowed up by starlight. But the young man no longer wanted to listen to the monster. The young man swung his sword upward and dealt a crushing blow to his enemy. The monster's huge head with horns shot up into the air from the power of the guy's attack. This head fell to the ground with a crash, and the young man calmly walked away in the other direction. The guy thought about it. He didn't know what to do now with what had already happened. The young man continued to stand alone in the rain, his thoughts clouded with memories. His thoughts took him to the past, where he was among his fellow servicemen. Suddenly a guy sat down next to him. This young man had red hair and a scar on his eye. The guys started talking, and after a while they were happily discussing something. They became comrades and went to war together. But his friend died in this very battle against the giants who brought chaos to the Empire. The young man found the bodies of all his comrades in one of the piles of corpses. The young man wondered what kind of pride sent them to fight to the death. The guy thought that his comrades relied on his strength, and thought that they were also strong, but he should have assessed his chances and escaped to the very end. The young man sat down and closed the eyelids of his dead friend. The guy did not understand why only his sword worked against the giants that the strongest sword of the Empire could repel. The guy was sorry, because if he had known this, then an ordinary warrior would never have stood on the front line, and his comrades would not have died first. The upset young man sat bowing his head in regret. Suddenly the young man heard someone's voice. He raised his head to look around. The young man again heard a fragment of a phrase. Gradually he began to recognize this voice. The guy screamed that they were still alive and stabbed his sword into the ground, and the deputy rose from the ground. Inspired by the realization that the young man was not the only survivor here, he went towards the sound of the voice. The young man held the spear tightly and moved forward towards the target. A huge stone appeared ahead, and a girl was sitting leaning against it. The young man recognized her as his commander-in-chief. The young man was very glad that she survived and was glad to see her, but then he noticed that her arm was missing, and instead there was the remnant of a bandaged shoulder. The young man was shocked and called her by name Adele. The young man noticed that she looked somehow unimportant for a commander, but the girl replied that Ronald himself didn't look any better either, even though he was a corporal. But Adele changed the topic to a more exciting one. She asked if their enemy Arnold was alive. Ronald replied that the monster was already dead, he killed it, and the corpse was lying nearby. The commander-in-chief calmed down, and the corporal suddenly heard something. Adele cried and thanked Ronald. The young man sat in silence for some time, looking towards the girl. But suddenly he spoke to her and suggested to the girl that since she was so grateful, he asked to listen to her request. Adele asked what kind. The corporal said that the burial of fallen soldiers. According to the regulations, the bodies are either left or burned. Could she treat them properly this time too? The commander-in-chief said that she was not sure, because the guy looked livelier than her. But the girl suggested that Ronald do this personally. The guy tried to object to the assessment of his condition, but immediately coughed with a strong cough. After coughing, there was blood in the corporal's palm. He looked at her, and said that he did not look any more alive than Adele and could die at any moment. Ronald explained to the commander-in-chief that most of the time he simply suffered from nonsense, so he did not have time to do much, and that is why his death looks extremely dishonest. Adele asked the guy if he survived, what he would like to do, to which the young man vaguely but enthusiastically replied that the list of things to do was simply huge. And Ronald, looking dreamily at the sky, added that right now only one thought comes to mind. The corporal asked the commander-in-chief about what it was like to study at the academy. The girl did not understand the question and asked the guy again. Ronald explained that the things that huge monster said hurt him. The young man added that despite all this, there was a much more important reason. His sister's last wish was to send Ronald to the academy. But the corporal lowered his head and despairingly said that it didn't matter, because soon he would be reunited with his family. But Adele tried to object to the guy's words that when the rain stopped, a search party would come out, but the guy didn't let her finish. Ronald said that it was all over for him, and he didn't understand why everyone around him was saying meaningless things. Suddenly the rain stopped. The rays of the sun appeared among the clouds and reflected their golden light in the will of the puddle on the ground. The young man and girl were perplexed by such a sudden change in weather from a storm to a clear glow. They did not understand how this could happen, how suddenly the rain stopped pouring and the storm subsided. But suddenly a commotion began right in front of them. The commander-in-chief and the corporal became bewildered and panicked. Right before their eyes appeared what they least wanted to see in this situation. An unknown creature with 8 wings appeared in the sky in front of his comrades in the battle. But this entity was not alone. It was surrounded by many similar creatures. But all of them had only 4 wings and their bodies were close to human ones. More and more of these creatures began to appear. They were all similar to each other, and they all surrounded an entity that had 8 wings. This was the main monster that suddenly appeared in the rays of the sun. The corporal and the commander-in-chief did not understand where they could come from, and even so many, they silently and warily watched their appearance. Despair appeared on Adele's face. The girl could not believe that nothing had ended with those 3 giants. The commander-in-chief realized that in the end she had failed to save the world for the 3rd time, and there was only one chance left, but she could not think of one. The girl was lost in her thoughts, from which she was brought back by the corporal's screams. Adele looked at him questioningly, but the guy was menacing and determined. Ronald asked the girl what she was doing and told her to pull herself together. The guy ordered her to use telekinesis or something similar and throw him up, since he would not be able to reach them with his blade from the ground. But the commander-in-chief did not understand how, in such a hopeless situation, the guy continued to remain calm and obsessed with battle. The corporal asked the girl in bewilderment if she was not going to kill them all, but she asked if he was seriously going to fight even in such a situation. The young man said without a doubt that he was going and reproached the commander-in-chief for having already resigned himself and coming up with a more beautiful coffin for himself. Ronald added with determination in his voice that even if he died, shouldn't he take these creatures with him? With these words, the young man confidently swung his blade, preparing to take the fight. Adele was completely amazed by the guy's determination. She was very surprised that the young man did not give up even in such conditions when there was no chance of winning. But the girl immediately summed up for herself that Ronald was such a person. That's why they were able to get so far. The corporal bravely covered the girl with himself, preparing to take the fight from the flying giants. The commander-in-chief called Ronald. The guy turned to her and asked what she wanted. The guy hurriedly muttered to her that he was busy and asked her to stop chatting. But at the same second his lips covered Adele's lips, not allowing him to finish his verbal indignation. Panic arose in the corporal's head. He did not understand what was happening now and clearly did not expect such a gesture from the commander-in-chief. The girl gave the guy something round and glowing blue through a kiss. The young man was completely dumbfounded and asked Adele what she told him. The girl whispered some words in the guy's ear. The commander-in-chief's words seemed to shock the guy, and he asked his boss what she was talking about. Ronald turned to indignation, because he did not understand whether the girl was seriously offering him this in such a situation or not. But the girl did not pay attention to the guy's confusion and said the last words. Adele asked the corporal for a request. If they meet again, let the young man ask her not to do anything stupid and become a simple seamstress. Meanwhile, behind the backs of the two comrades, winged creatures were preparing to strike at them. But the girl finished speaking. The commander-in-chief said that she tried so many things, but she never achieved success. The main monster with 8 wings formed a light sphere of blue energy, preparing to attack its enemies. And so, at the same moment, a shock wave enveloped the young man and girl. Flashes of different colors mixed together, forming one huge sphere of energy. After some time, in front of Ronald there was no longer a battlefield strewn with corpses, nor those winged giants, nor Adele, only a clear sky covered with insignificant clouds. The guy immediately jumped up from the ground and began calling for the commander-in-chief. But around there was only an endless field, mountains, forest, nothing like the world where the young man had been a minute ago. Ronald looked around carefully and noticed a row of houses in the distance. Apparently it was a small village. On the other side there was a river where children played and swam on a raft. The young man recognized this place. It was his hometown of Normandy. The corporal sat under a tree and could not believe that he had really returned to the past. Realization came gradually. Ronald realized that the commander-in-chief's words were true. The guy remembered recent events, the kiss with Adele, how she gave him the blue ball. When the guy asked the commander-in-chief what she gave him, the girl explained that the young man had just swallowed an orb that allowed him to reverse time. Adele explained that thanks to this sphere, she, being a simple seamstress, was able to achieve the rank of commander-in-chief. But in total the sphere allows her to return to the past 4 times. The girl added that she had already used it 3 times, so there was only one chance left, which is why she handed the sphere to Ronald, the power to destroy giants. Finally, the manager added that she was sure that Ronald was the key to saving the world. The girl told the young man in his ear that he would have to hone his skills, and she was glad that his desires were similar to her goals. But the corporal, remembering his recent words, realized that he said them just like that, and the commander-in-chief took them too literally. The girl added that if a guy is going to study, then he should go to the Frankfurt Academy. There are many outstanding people there, and Adele was sure that this would help the young man. And at the end the girl added that if they meet again, she asked the young man to persuade his past self not to do anything stupid and to become a simple seamstress. After all, she tried so many things, but she never achieved success. Having turned all this over in his head, Ronald was overcome by an unpleasant feeling. The guy tried to think that it was all a dream and began banging his head against a tree to wake up, and passers-by did not understand what he was doing so strange. The young man was plunged into despair, because even if this was reality, and he found himself in the past, what could the guy do alone? But then the corporal thought of something. Ronald picked up a stick from the grass and rushed into the city itself. The guy thought that since he was in the past, he would still be able to see his older sister. The young man ran forward through the city streets straight to his home from the past. Ronald was already looking forward to getting home and seeing his older sister. But suddenly his gaze was interested in something to the side by the tree. There were several guys standing there, and one of them, who looked younger than them, was tied upside down to a tree. Ronald was angry about this. He didn't understand why they hung the child upside down. The corporal recognized in these guys someone he knew from the past. But suddenly Ronald noticed another strange thing. The boy's legs were held up not by rope at all, but by magic. The young man thought that it was difficult to see a person with such a valuable ability even on the battlefield. So the guy could not believe that such a person existed in this small town. The The corporal reasoned that around this time there were people with such abilities. A red-haired boy came into Ronald's field of vision, looking very intimidated. Red was worried about the child and did not understand how long the hooligans would continue, because at this rate something bad could happen to this boy. The child begged the bullies to stop the bullying. The boy added to the hooligans that he really had no money at all. He also tried to justify that the medicine for his mother this month was very expensive, to which the bully replied that he doesn't care about all that. He's only emptying the pockets of this child, and he shouldn't worry about the health of his mother. The villain added that if the boy wanted to be a respectful son, then he should have earned money. The bully swung at the child and hit him in the face with all his might. He swung for another blow, and his buddies also wanted to join in, and were just waiting for this opportunity to do so. But then a thought occurred to the leader of the bullies. He called the red-haired magician guy standing behind them. The bully ordered the redhead to lift the child to the top of the tree, but the red-haired man tried to refuse, justifying himself by saying that if he lifted the boy even higher, he might accidentally drop him, to which the main one replied that he was a coward and was afraid like a girl, but it didn't look like he was hanging around. Ultimately, the villain ordered Alan to shut up and pick up the child. Otherwise, the red-haired one will be hanged, just like that boy. Alan didn't understand how it could have come to this, and thought that he shouldn't have started learning magic. Red remembered how he used magic to show performances to people in the square, simply with the intention of proving that he was also good at something. The redhead thought he should tell the bully that he couldn't keep up the magic anymore, but Alan was afraid to go against a group of bullies, so he simply continued to support the magic. But the boy with red hair still decides to say a word against the hooligans. He asks them to stop. But at that moment Alan receives a blow from Ronald with a stick. The brunette orders the magician to stop so that he does not kill the child. Immediately, due to interrupted magic, the boy falls to the ground. Seeing this, the hooligans are confused. The main bully shouted to Alan, asking what he was doing. The bully approached the redhead and asked that he was a joke to him. Alan stopped magic only because the guy said so, but the redhead justified himself by saying that it was an accident. But suddenly Ronald turned to Alan and asked him to forget about the bully and talk to him. The red-haired man turned to the guy and recognized him. The corporal continued to talk with his acquaintance as if nothing had happened, not paying attention to the hooligans. Ronald asked the red-haired man where he learned the magic of telekinesis, to which the boy timidly replied that he learned it from a grimoire bought from a peddler. The young man was amazed by this. He noted that Alan's magic was too good even with a cheap book. The guy found it amazing and decided to watch it some more. Suddenly one of the hooligans pulled a sword from his belt. This sound attracted Ronald's attention, and he became wary. The main bully approached him with a sword and indignantly declared that the young man dared to ignore him. The bully added that after he gave in to Ronald recently, he became pretty insolent. The villain decided to teach the guy some manners and swung his sword at him. Right in the face of the attack, Ronald was surprised by the size of the sword and where the bully found it. The guy also thought that the stance was simply terrible, but usually bare strength is enough for him, but not in this case. The bully seriously takes aim at the young man who dared to contradict him, but Ronald easily dodges the attack, which delighted the villain, causing confusion on his face. But this also surprised the guy himself, because his body is younger now, but as he realized, the rest has not changed, instilled in him during his military service. The feeling of battle remained entirely in the guy, even taking into account that he found himself in the past. The leader of the gang of bullies laughed at this. He added that luck was on Ronald's side, because he wanted to leave him crippled, unable to lift a spoon for the rest of his life. But the guy replied that he knew, because today he was extremely lucky, especially considering the lack of luck in general throughout his life. But the head of the bullies grinned and said to fall on his knees and beg, and then he would leave him alive, but without one arm. At the same time, Ronald maintained a calm expression to everyone, but when the bully mentioned that if he finished him off, he would take good care of his sister. With these words, the young man repeated the moment with his sister, but the bully laughed and said that every time he sees his sister, he thinks about this and other unpleasant things. But Ronald seemed to have been replaced. He swung his stick at the enemy with all his might. The main hooligan did not have time to do anything about this attack. He simply stood in amazement. Meanwhile, the stick, due to the strength and speed of the attack, cut off the enemy's ear, and it flew off into space. The main bully immediately grabbed the place where his ear used to be, dropping the sword from his hands. The bully screamed in pain and fear. His other people were confused. But then Ronald called the guy menacingly. His face was terrible. He stood in front of the bully like a rock. Then rage appeared on his face, and he threatened the bully with death. The main bully was still sitting cowered on the ground. Ronald stood in front of him with a stick. Alan stood behind him. And nearby was a gang of frightened hooligans. They didn't understand how this was possible. They didn't understand how this guy could chop off their main ear with a simple stick. But Ronald noticed these guys and addressed them, causing them to jump up from their seats in fear of him. The young man kicked their leader and ordered the bullies to take him away and disappear from sight if they valued their ears. The corporal added that they should not forget to leave the stolen money, along with payment for his ruined mood. The hooligans trembled in fear of Ronald. They said that they would return everything. The guy gave the boy the money that the bullies had left. But the child decided to clarify whether Ronald really wanted to give it all to him, even despite the fact that there was more than they took. But the young man said that everything was in order. The sword left by the hooligans would be enough for him. The corporal also reassured the boy that he did not have to worry about the fact that the villains could get close to the guy again, because they simply did not have the courage to appear near him. The boy thanked the guy with tears in his eyes from joy, but he told him to score and just go home. But then Alan, who was standing nearby, decided to intervene. He apologized to the boy for using his magical powers on him. The redhead explained to the boy that he knew he shouldn't have done something like that, even under Han's threats. The red-haired man added that he was so scared that he could not object to him. Alan apologized again, said it was his fault, and he was truly sorry. But the boy told the redhead that he roared the same way when Hans first brought you here. The boy added that when he saw Alan, he thought how similar their situation was. Therefore, the boy asked the red-haired man not to reproach himself too much, and the child added with a smile on his face that it was not his fault. The boy also said that he was pleased that Alan apologized. The boy said goodbye to the redhead and Ronald, and went home with the bag of gold. Alan waved after the boy and remained standing with the corporal. Ronald looked at the red-haired man thoughtfully, and the young man realized that Alan was not so bad. The corporal reminded the redhead of his presence. He said that he wanted to talk to him. The boy asked what he wanted to talk about, but Ronald said that they would see each other here in 4 days. Red didn't understand what he meant, but the corporal said that he was busy for now, so they would meet later, as soon as the moon rose in the night sky. Ronald noted that, of course, if Alan did not come, then perhaps he would guess what would happen, and with these words he pulled a sword from his belt, which made the redhead tremble. But the young man ran about his business, threatening the red-haired man after him that if he was late, he would kill him. Alan remained in that place, completely confused. Sometime later, the guy reached his home. Ronald took flowers for his sister on the way. But now at the threshold of the house he was wondering if this was too much. But the young man remembered that his older sister loved them, so he collected everything that caught his eye. But at the last moment, Ronald was going to throw out the flowers. But apparently he himself didn't notice how loud he was. The noise attracted his sister, and she went out to the threshold to find out what was happening on the street, and saw her brother. The sister greeted Ronald, who looked up at her in surprise. The guy thought that during his service in the army, he had wondered thousands of times what to say to her when they saw each other again. Should he apologize for leaving without saying goodbye or tell her how much he missed her? Ronald thought about it so much. But all these words would belong solely to Ronald the soldier. The guy thought that now all he could say was that he was home. Then his sister ran out of the house. She was a tall, beautiful girl with silver hair. The guy stood slightly drooping, because he wanted to say so many things to the girl. But he couldn't, so he only said that he was at home. My sister prepared a lot of food for lunch. She said that she never thought that the day would come when her cold brother would give her a bouquet. Isabel was Ronald's older sister, and she was very happy with the bouquet she received from her brother. The young man only muttered that he was glad that she liked it, and Isabel offered her younger brother to add more food, but the guy refused, because he was already full. Suddenly Ronald asked his sister a question: how old she was turning this year. The sister said that she was 22 and asked what it was. But the guy replied that he just accidentally forgot, at which the girl got a little angry and said that we shouldn't forget about this. Isabel even thought that her brother had a fever or a headache. Ronald began to reason that if his sister was 22, then there were about 10 years left before the invasion of those creatures. Meanwhile, Isabel carefully placed her hand on the guy's forehead. She noted that the guy didn't seem to have a fever. Ronald thought about his sister, that she was exactly the same as he remembered her. She is just as bright, kind and warm. Because of her, the guy wants such moments to last forever. But the guy understood that after 10 years, in order to protect his sister and this world, he needed to do something. Ronald removed her hand from his forehead and said that he needed to tell Isabel something. She asked what he wanted to say. My brother happily said that he was thinking about entering the academy. Isabel looked at Ronald questioningly. She didn't quite understand his words. But a second later she beamed with joy at her brother's news. She asked him to repeat it, because she didn't believe in his words, because the guy never wanted to hear about it. And then she began to shake her brother's hand. Isabel suddenly ran somewhere. Then the girl began to sort out all her things, saying that she knew that this day would come. After all, her brother is so smart, and she was sure that he would become the best in everything, to which the guy quietly thanked her. Suddenly Isabel placed a huge vat in front of her brother. The elder sister told Ronald that she had prepared a surprise for him. The vat was filled with gold coins. The young man was amazed at such a quantity. The girl explained that she secretly put them aside in order to surprise her brother in case he decided to enroll, so that he would have a chance to do so. Ronald admired his sister and asked when she managed to save so much. The young man told her to use the money herself, since there wasn't enough here. The sister tried to object, explaining that there were more coins than it seemed, although she did not know where her brother was going to enroll. But Ronald immediately replied that he would be enrolling in the Imperial Academy Frankfurt. Isabel, after a few seconds of realization, screamed throughout the house in shock at the news. The Imperial Academy Frankfurt is the best educational institution in the empire. In it, the most outstanding teachers from all over the continent, coupled with funding from the ruling family, created a place that provides an unparalleled education. This place is so prestigious that it is called the Workshop of Heroes, but has an extremely high status. People known to Ronald, such as Commander-in-Chief Adele, studied there. The Sword Master Shannon, the worst villain, the Winter Witch and many others also studied here. The Academy's graduates were very useful during the war, so much so that the Commander-in-Chief's advice was more than logical. But with such a high barrier to entry and insane prices, the popularity of this academy becomes a problem. But the guy thought about his sister's reaction. She said that Ronald could do it. That's why the young man decided to show Isabel the result. But then the guy noticed that he didn't think Alan would come. Ronald said the redhead's name incorrectly, and he corrected him. The red-haired man explained that he thought that if he had not come, the young man would not have left him behind. But the brunette asked him to forget about it. Ronald began to explain that they would be busy that night. There was something the guy would like to check with the redhead. Alan was confused by the young man's unexpected decision, but he reassured the red-haired man that there was nothing special there. Ronald immediately said that he would like the redhead to use telekinesis on him, and he added that Alan should raise it as high as possible. The redhead was surprised why the young man needed to use telekinesis so suddenly. Alan was perplexed why he would do something so dangerous. But Ronald assured that everything was not so dangerous. He simply asked the boy to do as he said. And he added that so that the redhead would not be afraid, because the guy would not die. Alan agrees. The red-haired man commanded that he begin. A blue glow appeared at his hands. Alan screamed the phrase about the invisible hand, and the blue glow became larger and enveloped all of Ronald. Suddenly the brunette felt something. His feet left the ground. The guy thought that this exceeded all his expectations. A few moments later the young man found himself in the air, hovering above the ground. Ronald noted that although this magic does not work as high and stable, the feeling was extremely similar to when Adele lifted him into the air. The young man recalled that during the battle with Arnold, it was telekinesis that allowed him to fight this monster on an equal footing. The guy flew up to the monsters and could attack them. Ronald noted that telekinesis is a rare skill among magicians, who are themselves rare, which meant that Alan would be the most important part of the future battle with Arnold. The guy noticed that the beginning was not so bad. But Alan said in a trembling voice that it was becoming more and more difficult for him, and asked the guy for permission to let him down. Ronald asked him to hold on a little longer, because he wanted to check something else, and then he would go down himself. But Alan did not understand what his words meant, since the guy was held in the air by telekinesis. The guy swung his sword with all his might. Alan was amazed that Ronald had just been able to cut off his mana flow. The young man jumped to the ground, The red-haired man was amazed at this action and asked the guy to explain it, but the brunette said that he was just a little possessive. But Alan did not understand what kind of acrobatics he was talking about, because for the first time he saw how someone cut the stream. But he immediately received a slight blow to the head, asking him to just score, because the young man himself did not know how it worked. Ronald thought that finding out the nature of this ability was just one of the tasks in his assigned homework, and that was probably the reason why his blade worked on him. But the guy thought that he needed to think about it right now, and he needed to take care of something. The young man told Alan that he had passed the test. The brunette threw the bag to the redhead and asked him to follow him, because they still had things to do before the moon set. But Alan was surprised that it was so late at night. But the brunette responded to his words that this would become the first page of Ronald's biography, the greatest historical book of the Empire. Red asked about Frankfurt Academy, and he added that the guy is good at martial arts. That's fine for him, but he himself can't do anything. He is also timid and cowardly, to which the young man asked him if he planned to continue living like this. After all, Alan has innate talent, and spending it on entertaining scum is not a good choice. The young man asked the redhead if this was really the life he wanted for himself. The guy explained that the redhead has various bad traits. He is timid and cowardly, and also a crybaby, shedding tears for no reason, and a loser who is afraid of everything. These words touched Alan to the quick. But Ronald said it was okay because now he could change. But now it's impossible to make up for lost time. And the brunette added that one day the red-haired man would regret it, and he mentally continued to himself that he would regret it, just like he did in his past life. For a while, Ronald remembered himself from the future, where he is already a warrior. But the guy returned to pressing problems and asked Alan what he decided. But the redhead was impressed that Ronald was worried about someone like him. The brunette reassured him that he wouldn't force his life, so he could come back if he wanted. The guy himself turned around and wandered away, telling the redhead that he had business. But Alan stopped him and said that he also wanted to change. Red added that he would go to Frankfurt with him, and asked to teach him everything that he should be able to do. This decision of Alan was only in the hands of Ronald. He grinned insidiously. The guy regained his calm appearance, and told the red-haired man that since he had shown courage for the first time, he decided to give him the first test for the great daredevil Alan. The boy immediately agreed, and Ronald, turning away from him, grinned evilly, because everything went as he had planned. Alan was shocked when he found out what his first test would be. The guys were sitting in the bushes. The red-haired one clarified whether this was really his first test. The corporal said that yes, this is it. Behind the bushes there was a fire, near which sat a moon goblin, and besides, this goblin was a leader. Ronald, with a flourishing look, asked the red-haired man how his task was, but he was in shock. But the corporal did not delay. He said that now it was time for them to start. The moon goblin is a type of goblin often found in these lands. Most people distinguish them from regular goblins by their yellow skin and disfigured bodies. But the truly unique feature of the lunar ones was their insane love for gold and other treasures. They often ambush merchants for the purpose of robbery. The goblins collect everything valuable in one place and arrange a celebration, which falls on a full moon, like today. The redhead understood why they were here, and the brunette only confirmed his assumptions. Ronald said with enthusiasm in his eyes that today they would completely rob them. Alan said that he had never even heard of such a thing before, that there are goblins who collect valuables and hold a holiday. Red asked how the young man knew about this, but he evasively replied that he had his own sources, because he couldn't tell him that in a past life he had accidentally stumbled upon them. Therefore, the guy simply switched the topic to the task and explained to Alan that he just needed to transfer all their treasures into the bag while they were sleeping. But the red-haired man was not sure of the simplicity of the mission, because he was afraid of making a mistake and waking them up. But Ronald simply replied that if they failed, they would be in trouble. These words frightened Alan even more, and he yelled that the mission was too dangerous, and it was worth thinking about everything, to which the brunette called him a coward. Ronald explained to the redhead, so that he would listen to him. In order for them to enter Frankfurt, they needed two things. The guy continued that, firstly, they need money, because the cost of training there is sky high. And secondly, they need real experience, although the means are a problem, but experience is more important. Ronald added that Frankfurt is filled with aristocrats who have received the best education since childhood, and if Alan wants to get around them, then there is only one way. This path meant gaining experience while risking your life. Ronald believed that these guys were ideal opponents. At the same time, we would get money and gain experience. 2 birds with 1 stone. The guy immediately asked if he had a better plan, to which the red-haired man refused, so the young man asked him not to argue with him. Ronald patted the guy on the shoulder and said that he could start right away. Alan used his telekinesis and began to gradually drag all the goblin's golden objects into the young man's bag. Red gradually moved objects one by one through the air, and the brunette sat and encouraged him, assuring him that there was just a little left. And just like that, Alan gradually filled both of Ronald's bags with gold. Finally, both bags were filled with treasures. The guy praised the red-haired man for his work, but he himself did not believe that he had succeeded. Ronald actually wasn't entirely sure, but in fact Alan was able to quickly get involved. The brunette decided that the boy was better than he thought about him, and in conclusion, he mentally added that he had found the ideal, truly valuable pawn. The guy returned to the topic. He told the red-haired that since they filled the bags to the brim, it was time for them to move on. Alan could not believe that they had finally finished, but Ronald confirmed his words, saying that they had nothing more to do here and could leave before something went wrong. Suddenly, a rapidly flying crow appeared from the forest. This bird was being chased by 2 armed guys. They ran along a forest path lined with trees. This crow did something to them, as the guys swore loudly at it. Ronald and Alan heard these screams. The brunette wondered what kind of fool would make such a noise in the forest in the middle of the night. These screams woke up the moon goblin. The creature stood up and did not understand where these screams were coming from so late. Suddenly the goblin noticed that their gold was missing from the chest. He instantly raised all his sleeping comrades. They all woke up and began discussing the thief's whereabouts. Suddenly they heard some sounds not far from the camp. Turning to the bushes, they saw Ronald and Alan carefully leaving with backpacks filled to the brim with gold. The guys also noticed the eyes of their enemies on themselves and realized that they were in big trouble. Without thinking twice, the moon goblins rushed towards Ronald and Alan as fast as they could. The redhead trembled and screamed in fear, but the brunette answered calmly enough that he knew so, because everything was going too smoothly. Frightened Alan suggested that Ronald throw his bags and run away, but the young man flatly refused this option, arguing their refusal by the fact that they would not be able to pay for entry without this gold, much less earn so much. Red tried to argue that in such a situation it is not the money that is important. Alan screamed as the goblins were coming straight towards them. The young man thoughtfully examined the long sword made of cheap steel, appraising it. The guy estimated that a sword with such weight and hardness would withstand about 15 attacks. But there are about 30 goblins themselves, and now the enemies are a couple of steps away from Ronald. They raised their paws to strike. The red-haired man called the young man and warned him of the danger, but the guy was only calculating in his head how to distribute these 15 attacks among the monsters. Having thought through all the details in his mind, Ronald decided that this should be enough. And now the brunette strikes the first blow at the enemies, hitting 3 monsters at once. 3 moon goblin heads shot up into the air. Alan sat in great shock at what was happening, and Ronald continued to cut up the villains. Now there were 14 of them left. The crows sitting in the trees gave out a piercing cry. The young man plunged his sword into the last enemy head. The corporal looked around and realized that this was the last monster, and everything turned out quite well. Alan sat still in place, but now his fear was replaced by amazement. To be honest, the red-haired man didn't even quite understand what had just happened, because everything happened too quickly. Alan began to reason that Ronald had decapitated 3 goblins at once with just 1 blow, and then, in front of the rest of the crowd, the guy simply disappeared. The brunette began to move at incredible speed, like a laser beam. In the blink of an eye, the guy reappeared behind the startled crowd. All Alan saw was the heads of the moon goblins flying off and Ronald moving through the crowd with incredible speed. And now the brunette left behind him a crowd of dead goblin bodies. It was an amazing sight. Suddenly, Ronald interrupted Alan's thoughts and asked him why he was frozen there, planning to continue messing around, to which the red-haired man only apologized. But the guy told him that there was no need to apologize and asked him to just pack his things quickly, because they were returning home. Ronald noted that this was all tiring, because he expected the walk to be easy, but they overestimated themselves and their comrade, and meanwhile Alan was struggling to carry all this load. The brunette wondered if his muscles were aching from the usual slicing of a bunch of pathetic goblins, perhaps because Ronald was still growing. The guy summed up that when he returns, he will be intensely involved in physical training. The red-haired man asked the young man what kind of scream was that in the forest, but the guy himself did not know. As they were about to leave the goblin camp, they heard a shout, someone telling someone to stop. But the young man didn't understand why he was yelling in the forest in the middle of the night, and agreed that these guys were just stupid. Suddenly, behind the guys, someone took aim with a bow at them. An arrow with a red tip flew straight at Alan. The boy turned around at the whistling of the arrow, but it was almost in front of his face. But Ronald managed to intercept the arrow right before its attack. Alan only realized after a moment that the arrow was flying straight at him. The brunette didn't understand what was wrong with the forest, why it was cursed, because there were so many strange guys in it. Suddenly 2 archers appeared in front of them. They were surprised that Alan and Ronald turned out to be people, and children at that. This angered the brunette so much that he broke the arrow with one hand, like a straw. The guys approached Alan and Ronald and apologized to them with a smile on their faces. The archer justified himself by saying that he thought something rustled in the distance, and he thought that it could be a monster. Meanwhile, he looked at the guys' bags, completely stuffed with zloty. The second archer said they almost killed a man, but Ronald immediately saw through their lies and said it directly, because the guys didn't even try to hide their greedy glances. The brunette asked them to end this farce and answer normally. He asked them a direct question about who they were. Both archers were confused by the unexpected inhospitability of Ronald, who saw through their bad intentions. But one of the strangers continued to smile carefreely and said that he forgot to introduce himself properly. At the same moment, he pulled out a dagger from behind his back and screamed that they were hummingbirds. Ronald was surprised for a second, but immediately intercepted the enemy's blow. Pulling the hand of one of the hummingbirds towards himself, the guy struck the enemy's jaw with his other hand. The archer immediately coughed up blood from the force and pain of the attack. Ronald recognized these guys. Suddenly, the second of the hummingbirds rushed towards the guy, intending to stab him. But the brunette did not see him, and Alan decided to help his comrade. Red concentrated his telekinesis magic and directed it at the enemy archer. The cry of the red-haired ally attracted the attention of the brunette, who turned around and noticed the enemy behind him. The blonde archer realized that he could not move for reasons unknown to him. Ronald was glad that Alan was able to help him in the battle. The brunette kicked the knife out of the archer's hand. Now he had the enemy's dagger, with which the guy instantly launched many attacks on the archer. The blonde didn't understand who he was to have such power, but at the same moment his body fell apart into small pieces. Parts of the enemy's body fell to the ground, horrifying Alan. He asked the brunette if the archer was dead. Ronald confirmed that he was dead, because he had no need to feel sorry for the one who tried to kill him. The guy asked the redhead if he heard the guy's words saying that they were from Hummingbird. Colibri was an organization that committed all possible crimes, such as poaching, kidnapping, human trafficking. They were the most brutal criminal group in the empire. The young man pierced the second archer with a knife. Ronald added that if it weren't for him, these two would have already cut out Alan's organs, and he himself would have been quietly buried somewhere. The red-haired man tried to object, but the young man interrupted him and called him a fool, because if they had let these villains go, knowing the truth, it would have been regarded as a crime. Ronald told Alan to stop appearing and begin to get ready, but at the same moment some sounds were heard behind him. The guys turned around and saw a bag that for some reason was moving on its own. The red-haired one explained that this bag was brought by those criminals. Ronald and Alan approached the unknown bag to see what was hidden there. The redhead suspected that there could be a captured animal there. The brunette opened the bag, and in his darkness his eyes sparkled with a bright blue light. With a piercing squeak, the creature flew out of the bag. A strange blue chick appeared in front of the two young men. Ronald and Alan were amazed by what they saw. For the first time in their lives, they saw a bird with blue feathers. The young men sincerely admired the chick they saw. Suddenly Ronald noticed something. There was some kind of chain on the bird's legs. This was the hummingbird's trap. Their hunting shackles. They disrupt the flow of the victim's mana and complicate movements. Brunette noted that previously it seemed to him that these shackles were used in special cases or when catching unique creatures. Then perhaps this blue bird was such a creature. Suddenly the chick spoke, and a golden glow of some kind of pictogram appeared behind him. The bird said that something had finally connected and opened both wings to the sides, illuminating the space with the bright golden light of the pictogram. Alan screamed. He was amazed that the bird was talking, but Ronald called the redhead an idiot and explained that this doesn't happen, it's just the magic of communication. The brunette thought that the bird spoke as soon as it got out of the bag. He thought that the bag itself was capable of blocking mana. He asked the voice if he was the owner of the bird. The voice immediately replied that yes, his name is William, and at the moment he is studying fantastic creatures, and this bird Michael is under his protection. No matter how much William tried, the connection did not work. He was already thinking about reporting this. But everything worked out. But then he asked who these guys were, to which the brunette replied that they were just virtuous travelers. The guy told how they encountered poachers. These criminals stole William's bird, and then the memories were too bloody to explain. This is how Ronald decided to end his story, so as not to go into details. Therefore, the guy summed up that they simply saved the bird. But William did not quite understand everything and was surprised by his story. The man said that he thought about it, but did not even imagine that this would actually happen, and added that he owed a huge debt to the guys. William said that he was not even sure how he could repay them, but Ronald told the man not to think about it, because what was more important was how to return the bird to him, which looked very tired after being captured. The brunette suggested that if he removes the shackles, the bird will be able to fly normally. The man answered him that this is most likely the case. William added that dream birds have amazing house instincts, so if the guy can free her, then let him do it. Ronald took out his sword and at once cut the shackles on the bird's legs. The chick did not understand what happened, and the shackles crumbled into small pieces. The guy told the bird to return to his dad, and he added in a sweet voice so that the chick would not make him worry. But the bird turned its tail towards the young man. He didn't understand what this meant and got angry. But William explained that the chick asks to pull out a feather before it flies away. Apparently, one day he wants to meet again. The man added that after removing the feather of the dream bird, it would allow the guys to know the direction to it like a compass. The young man took out one feather. William asked the guy if he had gotten the pen, and added that if they visited his establishment later, he asked him to stop by and check on him and Michael so that he would be sure to repay the guy's debt. With these words, the bird rushed away, and the brunette was surprised at such a high speed. Suddenly Alan noticed something in Ronald's hand. He noted that it felt like he had been stung. The guy looked at his hand and was surprised. The young man still didn't understand what it was. A few days later the guys reached the town. There were many different merchants and tents with carts. They had different goods. One of the men looked at the blue pendant. He assessed the cost of the stone and the skill of its processing. This man was the owner of a trading company. He said that the pendant was amazing and offered 20 gold coins for it. He added to the guys that everything they brought was worth a lot of money and noted that he was having a good day, and that he was happy to help such an important client. Ronald was glad that at least someone realized this. After all, other merchants were simply scammers and offered only 5 gold pieces for this pendant. The brunette added that he was glad that he had found such a decent merchant. This walk paid off for him, and the man himself was flattered by his praise. The owner of the trading company asked the guy if he wanted to evaluate anything else besides these things. The young man thought about it. The guy took out from his pocket something that looked like an egg the color of the night sky, and said that it was not for sale. He was just wondering what it was. This item was left to Ronald by that blue bird of dreams. The man carefully examined the object. It was an egg, and it shimmered with blue and purple light. At first the guy thought that the bird had shit in his hand, but he was wrong. To check for safety, the guy threw the egg to the side with all his strength, straight into the stone as a test. But not only did the egg not break, it crumbled a giant cobblestone. Thus, Ronald was able to find out that this is a very strong thing. Still, the guy didn't know whether it was an egg or something else. But he knew one thing. This was an object created by a rare fantastic creature, which probably cost a lot of money. The merchant carefully studied this object, its color, this texture. The man suggested that it could be horse droppings, to which Ronald replied that of course not. The merchant laughed and said that, unfortunately, he did not know what it was, but noted that the object was very unusual. The man suggested that the young man identify the object from professionals. The guy agreed with this idea, but added that he couldn't sell this property right now because he was very interested. Ronald asked the merchant if he sold books about Frankfurt. He clarified about the Frankfurt Academy. The brunette confirmed and added in response that he and his friend were planning to take the entrance exams, but knew very little about this academy. The man was delighted with these words. He added that what a lucky coincidence. The merchant added that his daughter plans to take the entrance exams to this academy, and will be able to help the guys, and she was just supposed to return. At the same moment, a woman's voice was heard behind the guys asking what was happening and who these guys were. Ronald and Alan turned around, and the man added that she was his daughter. His only daughter Maria. She was a beautiful tall blonde. The guys fell into a stupor for a moment at the sight of the girl. They looked at Maria. She had a cold and imperturbable look. The merchant asked the girl to say hello to the guys, because he considered them important people with whom he had just made a profitable deal. But Maria was skeptical about this, calling her father's clients children. The man scolded her and asked her to watch her language. The merchant apologized to the guys for the girl, explaining that she grew up in this company, so she could be rude. But Alan reassured the man that everything was fine. The redhead added that Ronald could lose his temper. At that moment, the brunette approached the girl and asked if she was really Maria, the same Maria who uses Sandy as her middle name. The girl agreed and asked the young man a counter question about how he knew this. The guy just said that the girl really looks like her, but the man Ronald knew was a guy. The young man asked Mary another question and called her closer to him. The girl was perplexed as to what the guy wanted to ask, and he asked in a whisper in her ear if she had something downstairs. Ronald meant whether she was a man, but the girl did not understand what the guy was trying to say. For some time, Maria pondered the essence of the words suddenly spoken by the guy. The young man thoughtfully added that no matter how you look at it, it doesn't look like he was her. The guy suggested that the old man could have another child, which he does not know about. But at the same moment, the offended girl hit Ronald's face with her hand, calling him sick. Even in this situation, the brunette analyzed the blow he received in the face, so that this feeling seemed familiar to him. This person was possibly Count Maria Sendi. When Ronald served in a place called Amsterdam, Maria was in charge of supplies. Maria was an impressive person, with an excellent work ethic, an easygoing personality, and the ability to get along with anyone. However, when the topic of penises came up among the guys, Maria suddenly became angry with everyone. He started slapping people. Then Ronald was very curious about the reason for this. The guy was going to ask his friend when they would meet again, but the opportunity never presented itself. After all, Maria died earlier, but the young man could not even imagine that he would find the answer here. Count Maria is actually a girl. She was angry that the guy, because of his thoughts, reacted to the blow with a smile on his face. And with these words, Maria decided to take another blow to Ronald's face. But the brunette stopped the girl by slapping her on the head with his fist. The guy explained that he simply allowed himself to be hit once, and even then, because he was mistaken. But Maria flashed an angry look at him. The girl did not give up and hit her head in Ronald's jaw, calling him names. They got into a fight, calling each other names in every possible way. Meanwhile, Alan and the merchant simply watched on the sidelines, but then the spectators decided to put an end to the violence, and ran to separate their new acquaintances from fighting. Sometime later in the tent city, Alan did not understand what was happening between Ronald and Maria, because they had just fought. The girl asked if the unknown people really just left everything to the guys. The young man agreed and asked to examine Maria to see if they were okay. Otherwise he will buy something else from the swords. Alan was surprised how the two managed to get along in such a short period of time. Maria asked Ronald why they left him 3 blades. Wouldn't it be hard to carry them? To which the guy objected that this was just in case, since he is rough with swords. The girl again asked how the guy liked the swords. The young man replied that they were not bad, but this sword made of black iron was the best. Maria explained that black iron is quite strong, so it is an item that even famous knights are looking for. The new friend added that she didn't know how rough the guy was with the sword, but this one was unlikely to break. Meanwhile the guy was already in his thoughts. He admired the fact that it was a black iron sword, and in the past it had been his favorite weapon. The girl noticed that there was an excellent magic stone in this iron, so they should just leave the sword to them, but then she thought about it. Maria turned to the red-haired man, calling him a cute magician, and asked what kind of magic he uses. He hesitated a little and muttered that he used telekinesis. The girl was delighted. She called Alan amazing and told him that if he showed himself well, he could get a scholarship, which the red-haired man was happy about. Next, Maria turned to Ronald. She asked the guy what technique he planned to show in the practical exam. The girl explained to the young man that in order for him to enter Frankfurt, he needed to impress the professors in the practical exam by showing them his techniques. Maria added that the theoretical exam is also difficult, but cannot be compared with the practical one, and so much so that it is enough to show yourself well in practice to get admitted. The girl in conclusion said that in other words, if you don't show your worth in the practical part, then you can forget about the academy. But the guy sighed with annoyance, because he thought that a swordsman only needs to be able to fencing. The guy asked Maria what they usually show during the exam. The girl said that some nobles show secret techniques. Maria added that most martial artists and candidates show their personal mana martial techniques. The young man stopped her story and asked that children who wield a sword at that age could use mana even without being magicians. Maria was surprised and replied that if he was a promising student in Frankfurt, then it was normal to be able to do this. The girl said that you first need to learn to sense mana, and then use it in battle. This is the basics. The new friend understood from the guy's face that he couldn't sense mana. Ronald asked if using mana is not similar to using aura. This question shocked the girl. Maria covered her face with her hands and could not understand whether the guy seriously wanted to enter the Frankfurt Academy. The girl objected that how could it be possible to compare mana and aura and consider them similar, to which the young man replied that he knew about this and Maria was only making noise in vain. Suddenly the girl got up from the table and ordered the guy to go outside. She asked permission to borrow these daggers since she left her sword at the forge. But Ronald got angry because he was worried that Maria might hurt them, and the girl told him not to worry, because everything would end before it even began. The new friend added that if something happened to the swords, she would pay twice or even 3 times as much for them. Maria told the guy to finish the dialogue and follow her. The girl decided to conduct special training for the young man. Mana is the source of the power of nature. Like air, it is a natural energy that exists everywhere in the world. However, this does not mean that anyone can use it. The guy couldn't use mana. The girl said that aura can be called a type of mana. But there is a difference between them, like between heaven and earth. Even those whose talent is recognized train for 10 years and only with insane efforts they barely master the innate power. This is the aura. Maria asked the guy if he understood anything, but he weakly replied that he seemed to. Ronald remembered meeting them on the battlefield from time to time. They used aura and possessed unusual power. They were really boring, so it's quite surprising to find out how amazing this is. But the young man noticed that, being cut up, they still died. The girl suggested finishing the explanations and starting the training. Maria noticed that she would convey everything faster if she used his body rather than his head. Ronald thought she was just a young girl, but suddenly the girl reduced the distance between them several times in just one instant. The guy didn't even understand what happened, since the girl didn't give him time to understand. The young man took Maria's blows, defending himself with his sword. Ronald was impressed by the girl's strength. Her gaze conveyed menace and seriousness. The swords that met flashed with golden light. The guy deflected the blow of the swords of his new acquaintance. The young man was impressed that the girl had such power while being so young, and even used 2 daggers at once. Ronald noticed that he couldn't see it, so he wasn't sure if it was some kind of mana fighting style. Maria was angry that the guy easily deflected her attack. The girl planned to end the battle with 1 blow. She wanted to show the guy the full power of mana and make him give up the idea of enrolling. The new acquaintance thought that it was better this way than to face humiliation during the exam, but instead the guy was crowding her. Maria wondered if this was the ability of someone who didn't have mana. She was impressed. But the young man did not let her think. He asked the girl what she was thinking about. Ronald again effectively deflects her attack. Now the guy himself begins to strike. He swung his huge sword. At the very last moment, he told the girl to dodge rather than block, but she was confused. The guy struck with all his strength. Maria was barely able to dodge him. The girl was carried back by the shock wave and was able to slow herself down with her sword. Maria noticed that one delay could cost her dearly. She asked the guy if he was unusual. Ronald replied that he was the same as her. The guy noticed that even without taking into account mana, the girl is very good with a blade, to which Maria added that she has slight problems with her center of gravity. Ronald said that if she corrected them, she would go far, but the guy was heading somewhere. The girl told him not to think that he won just because of this, but the young man replied that he did not care and asked her to keep her word. Ronald once again reminded her of his promise to pay 3 times as much for the daggers. Before his eyes and before the eyes of Maria, the dagger crumbled into pieces. The girl did not understand what happened. Her gaze expressed shock, and the young man simply told her to prepare money for the dagger. But then the girl felt someone's touch behind her. Maria turned around, and there was Alan, who praised her for the fight, because he, to some extent, understood her feelings. But Ronald called the redhead over and added that he was very tired, and their new friend was left standing in amazement, not understanding who these guys were. The next day the guy came to Maria for money, but the girl prepared something else for Ronald. These were books, among which was a collection of problems and notes on the Frankfurt theoretical exam, which Maria made herself. The girl clarified that the guys didn't need them, because there was only a month left before the exam, to which the brunette replied that they were needed, but did not understand why she tried so hard for the guys. A suspicion crept into Ronald's head. He warned the girl that if she was going to set him up, she would feel bad later. But Maria immediately replied that she was not going to set them up, she just liked these guys. The girl explained that she provides this service because she wants both guys to enroll and helps them for free. Maria wanted to offer personal help in preparing for the exams, but because of trade, she and her father must travel. The girl wished the boys to study hard for their own sake and threatened that if they failed even with her books, then she would remember it to them. The guy smiled and told her to think better about herself. Maria said goodbye to the young men and said that they would see each other in the capital the day after the exam, and she jumped into the carriage and left. She then added so that the boys had time to read the books. Alan waved after her, and Ronald thoughtfully followed the girl with his gaze.